Good morning, YouTube, and today we have Daniel Pasula with his 2002
Retro
Dragon Beatdown, whatchamacallit?
2002 Dragon Beatdown deck. This is one of the very few meta decks that we actually had back in 2002. The 2002 era of cards was essentially Legend of Blue Eyes, and then the two starter decks, which were Yugi and Kaiba. And optimization wasn't really kind of a thing at this time, so I'm essentially kind of running what would essentially the deck kind of look like at this time, and just kind of essentially my interpretation of what the deck would essentially look like. And unlike any other retro deck, you know, like Goats or Dragon Rulers, hint, this deck isn't really like competitive in any sense because it's essentially a lot slower and it was optimized to what we essentially had back in the day. But it's still fun to play, and it's good to kind of show beginners how it was done, and it's really good for nostalgia's sake because this is essentially what the game was like when it first started. So it's really fun to play. So let's kind of get into it. So from the starter deck Kaiba, we play 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons because this is Dragon Rush Beatdown. These are old Blue Eyes White Dragons. And then we do play 1 Trihorn Dragon. These were our strongest monsters in the game essentially at the time. And this is essentially what you used for your Dragon Rush Beatdown. These are the strongest things to also summon off of your Lord of D with the Flute of Summoning Dragon, which we'll get to in a moment. For your main beaters, we played 3 Lejin. This was the strongest normal monster that you didn't need to tribute for. This was essentially your primary beater. And then for your secondary beaters, we do play 3 Battlelocks and 3 Neo the Magical Swordsmen. Essentially, these were your secondary beaters because they were the second strongest at 1700 attack, and they could essentially beat over anything's defenses for the most part next to Lejin, but essentially you play a lot of 17 hitters, and that's why they're important. And then for the last of the normal monsters, we do play 2 Giant Soldier of Stones. We did have the Mystical Elf, but this guy's attack was better at 1300 to her 800. And he had 2,000 defense, which is really good to sit on because you essentially had to bait out a Summoned Skull or a Blue Eyes White Dragon if they wanted to kill this. So that's why it was really good. For the effect monsters, there weren't very many. We do play 3 Wall of Illusions. This essentially was the, I guess,
Kind of
Penguin Soldier of the time,
Pulse.
But it also had 1850. So it was kind of your secondary defender, essentially. But it was also kind of better because, you know, it just immediately sent it back to him.
It also doesn't target, does it?
No, it doesn't target either.
Not bad.
Yeah. But, of course, who cared about targeting?
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, if it's somebody wanted to try something fun.
Yeah. And then for the secondary flip effect monster, which this isn't a flip effect, we do play 3 Man-Eater Bugs. Essentially, opponent attacks into this, and they're losing a monster. This was really, really, really good. This was a mandatory 3-of because this was instant spot removal, and this was something the opponent had to really be worried about if they had like a Summoned Skull or a Blue Eyes on the field, or any of their big hitters. And then for the main part of Dragon Rush Beatdown, we do play 2 Lord of Ds. Essentially, your dragons can't be targeted, and also, essentially, this allows you to just special summon monsters. And 1200 attack for a level 4 isn't that bad, especially since he allows you to mass special summon. So that's what's really, really good. That's it for the monsters. For the spells, we have the Big 5, which consisted of Raigeki, Dark Hole, Monster Reborn, Change of Heart, and Pot of Greed. Essentially, we didn't have a ban list at the time, but we did have a limited list, and these were the first cards to hit the list. And you, essentially, if you were playing competitive, you had to play all of these cards, but they were one-ofs. But if you opened up your hand with any of these cards, you were essentially in a good position. And then, for another spell, I do play 1 Swords of Revealing Light. It was only at 2 on the limited list, as well as Card Destruction, and this deck was mostly aggression, so it didn't really need to worry about stalling so much, so that's why we only really played 1. And then, of course, we play 2 Flute of Summoning Dragons, because if you have this plus Sword of D and any dragons in your hand, you're essentially winning because spot removal wasn't that big of a thing back in the time, and this allowed you to get 2 free Blue Eyes White Dragons or 2 huge monsters on the board at the same time, and that's why it was really, really good at this time. But it was kind of conditional, and that's why it wasn't as good as like Summon Skull Beatdown, but I prefer it. And then for the last of the spells, we do play 3 Fissure. This is essentially the main spot removal, because it just removes any one of your opponent's monsters, because they will more than likely only have one on the field at the same time. So this is really, really, really nice.
Still not a bad card.
Oh yeah, this is a good card even today, because it doesn't target. Now you're probably wondering why I don't play Card Destruction, because that was legal at 2. Well, it's because monsters were less recurable as they were back in as they are today. Especially the spells and traps, and you didn't want your opponent getting any sort of cards at all. Especially if they had like a full hand of 4 or 5 and you had a hand of 3, you didn't want them having more cards than you. So card destruction wasn't as optimal, unless you were playing like Exodia or something. So next for the traps, we only played 6. We played 3 Wabakus, which essentially just, you didn't die. This card says you don't die for the turn. And then 3 trap holes. Normal summoning was the main thing we do at this time. Like, you see in this deck, that special summoning is only done by, 3 cards. So, essentially, this was your primary killer of summons.
Are those all 3 Legend of Blue Eyes?
Yeah, these are all Legend of Blue Eyes OGs. They're not first ed, unfortunately. But they're all from the set, super rares, too. I think this is my first card I ever pulled from a pack, actually. But, yeah, that's it for the deck. There was no extra deck because, obviously, back in the day, the polymerization was a thing, but nobody played it because there was nothing to fuse with. We had no fusions.
Oh, there was.
What?
Metal Dragon.
Metal Dragon? That wasn't until Metal Raiders.
No, it was out.
No, that was Metal Raiders.
Alright, anyway. But there was a fusion first set.
Yeah, but not really any good fusions. So, essentially, we didn't play an extra deck because we mostly just focused on our Blue Eyes White Dragons and beating down our opponents. And it's really fun, really nostalgic. It really takes you back to the roots of what the game used to be back in the day. So that's why it's really fun to kind of take a step back, and I will be bringing to you guys a Summon Skull Beatdown because it's essentially almost the same deck, just with a few cards mixed around, but that'll come at a later time, and we'll show the contender, also the best deck of the format, which is Summon Skull Beatdown. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you again later.